Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast. This is Ritch.
And this is Eric.
And this is part of a tradition that we started last year where we want to set up an episode at the beginning of the year to help guide you and add value for your career in 2025. And there's a couple things that we want to talk about that we think are relevant and valuable that you need to know about. The first one is kind of the state of A&R today. A&R is artist and repertoire, and it's the whole element of what record companies and what people are looking for. Now, you don't have to be signed to work with A&R. It means working with the artist and working with the material that you are given. So there's a couple things going on. A&R used to be a faith-based decision in the past where, people had faith in their own abilities, that they could identify talent, but more importantly, they had faith that there was a marketplace out in the world for you, the artist. Unfortunately, the best of them, 10 to 15% success rate. So then it became data-driven, which is what it is today. And now you look at, a lot of people where the data says, this song is really taking off. This hit is really happening. We should sign this. And, this is not something that record companies are willing to do anymore. There was a time over the last 5-6 years where things blew up on TikTok and they would sign the artist. But there's too many variables to make that. And what they found was exactly that. They found these people aren't artists. They found these people they don't have a backlog of 10, 12, 20 songs.
Exactly.
They don't perform live. Right. And it's like, that great analogy where everybody at the label got into the Ferrari and they floored it to a red light.
Exactly. Yeah. And they had that example with Lil Nas X. That was the exception. It was such a huge out of the park hit. But then they realized, wow, we got to get more material based around him. We got to set up his image, everything.
And a career. It was more than just material. There was no songs. There was no performance. There was no nothing.
Right.
So, that's a very important element. The other thing that I wanted to talk about on the A&R side is that what I'm hearing from a lot of A&R people today is that when they're interested, and this goes back to traditional A&R, is the live component. That in 2025, if you want a career in music, once somebody hears music that they love, there's got to be a live component to it.
Right.
And as you know, that's an entirely different aspect than writing. It's an entirely different aspect than record making. It's where, artist and audience meet.
Right.
And sometimes, in certain genres, it's very, very important. But I would say in any genre today where you have lots of success, what's the biggest demand? When can we see the artist live, both from the industry and the public?
And I think what's happening too, when these labels are signing these 360 deals, which have become obviously commonplace now, they want to see a return on their investment. So clearly the recorded side is not getting that return on that investment because basically it's become a loss leader.
Music is free.
Exactly. So you're getting that music for free. And so now what are the other areas that can be monetized? Well, it's touring, maybe, music placement, merch. And those are all part of those 360 deals that are coming into play. So yeah, I can see where that trend is happening because they want to know that artist can deliver live and can do a tour, which means revenue coming in from shows, from merch, from other ancillary incomes that come from that. And so yeah, I definitely agree that I do see that as part of the trend that's going to happen. One of the other trends too that we've touched on a little bit throughout 2024 going into 2025 was the whole idea of the trend that's shifting with all the labels that are trying to develop more of the super fans. We talked about that and how that whole trend is going where they believe, and I believe to a certain extent too, it'll be interesting to see how it works in from theory to practice, that they want to develop more of the super fan that goes and spends more money on an artist, that will go and be there for any type of event, that they'll be there for any kind of meet and greet, for any kind of extra experience that they bring to the table that they would be willing to do.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. There is that element. What I find, I guess, questionable about the belief is the idea that, number one, you have to have an enormously rabid fan base to make that work, number one. And number two, you also have to have artists that are willing to participate in that. Not all artists are willing to participate in that. So it's kind of a catch-22. You know, if you have the audience, will they participate? And number two, if you have the audience, does the artist want to actually do that? It is going to be interesting. It is that idea of trying to extract more money out of the existing fan than you're currently getting. I don't know if it's a long-term solution to anything. I think what record companies are thinking when they do this is they're thinking of ways to make extra money because, you know, streaming and other elements of the business aren't what they used to be. Well, nothing is what it used to be.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that trend too. We talked, I think, in 2024, Jim by Jin and also Hazy Kim, that we talked about their experience and how they create these experiences, even with the CDs that are still obviously very popular in Korea, that part of the Japan, world, and how they're making that just like an experience onto themselves. So I see the logic of why the labels are doing that. It'll just be interesting to see how it works, and besides theory, if it happens in real time and a real world experience.
And what kind of value are they giving? I mean, Superfan, okay, but what do you get? You know, you want my money, got it. But what is the value I'm getting? I mean, is it just a meet and greet? Is it a better seat? Is it some kind of unique experience with the art? I don't know.
And how does this apply to you guys that are just starting out in your careers? Maybe you should start thinking about what you could be offering in your shows,
to your fans,
your merch, and your fans. And that's the reason why we're talking to you guys in such big terms, because you at the level that you're at now need to be thinking about these things, because you're trying to make super fans out of your audience or trying to find them. So I think that's going to be a really, really interesting thing for you guys to be doing.
Absolutely. And the other thing that, you know, like, what are you doing to create value for your audience?
Correct.
Are you heading out as a band to the merch table? Are you meeting fans when the show is over and signing pieces of merch and being available to people? You know, or are you just hiding out in your dressing room because you're not comfortable? I mean, all of these things matter today.
Right.
You know, and I get it. It's a very personal thing as to whether you want to even engage in that kind of thing. But I think, you know, beyond just to the point you're making, Eric, which is an important one, is, you know, the whole value component. What kind of value are you giving your fans?
Right.
Is it just the show? Is it a meet and greet? Is it, you know, an event where you're like having maybe, you know, a picnic or something where everybody can come and intermingle with you? What is it that you're doing to build the relationship with your audience? I think that's important.
And on another level of A&R, we talked about both Universal Music and Warner Music Group Atlantic that underwent major restructurings this year. And so we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
what's happening.
Atlantic, for example, got a new chairman, and they are replacing, you know, a lot of executives at the company, and you're going to see a whole different kind of A&R philosophy.
Right.
Because, you know, they're going to put, you know, he's going to have his own stamp on it, and it should be very, very interesting. It's the guy that ran 10K Records. Ice Spice was a big artist that they had a lot of success with. It's a gamble. He has no experience running a major label, which is interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see how well that does. Universal, which is the kingpin of all labels because of its size and magnitude worldwide, restructured and laid off a lot of people, you know, which is natural because they're not making the money that they once did. I think what we're going to see, Eric, in the coming, you know, year is a consolidation. I think we're going to see it more and more and more in more areas than just, you know, those are two that have already done it.
Right.
So you're going to see more of those changes in A&R. And I also think from the A&R perspective for our audience, one of the things that's important is fewer signings.
Right.
But more time and energy put into them.
Yeah.
Rather than just next.
Exactly.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah. And one of the other trends that we're seeing in 2025, which is, you know, always been a trend, but we want to talk about it more because it really directly affects you guys, is building an audience.
Yes.
And the idea of always to be recording and releasing new songs. And when do you connect with listeners? They'll have a body of work to listen to, single songs, EPs.
Yes. I think the whole idea of, you know, so many people, and it's so interesting you bring this up, Eric, because I meet artists all the time who say, I'm working on my album.
Right.
And the one thing I want to say is if you do not have an audience, do not make an album. It's too much time, effort, and energy to just say to someone, here's my album, listen. No one will do that.
Right.
Let me ask you guys. It'd be interesting to get, and hit us back in the comments on this question. How many of you will go out and buy an album of a new artist you've never heard of just on the basis of one song? I will bet everyone listening to this that can answer that question, you listening to an album, you have a long-term relationship, musically speaking, with that artist. I will bet you. I mean, I've asked my classes this every single term for like the last 3 or 4 years, and it is always the case. They have long-term relationships. Otherwise, they're not willing to listen to an album by someone unless they have a relationship with them already. So for new artists, I think
the key is releasing singles. Yeah.
Yes, and building your audience.
Right.
That's
with each release.
Look at Billie Eilish. Billie Eilish released 14 songs over 3 years before ever putting out an album.
Right.
She had a very significant audience. She didn't just, put out a song and say, here's my album, buy it. We don't live in that world. Now, that's obvious and logical, but yet artists still, think in terms of album cycles.
Well, there's some worlds, like my world of hard rock, heavy metal that I'm in, that still release albums, but I'm even seeing that trend changing.
Yeah.
You're seeing bands like Motley Crue just announcing that they're just going to, release singles now. There's all kinds of bands that I'm hearing that. And even when they are releasing albums, they'll release 3 to 5 singles counting down leading up to the release. Muse is a perfect example of this. That's been doing this for probably the last 3 or 4 album cycles, where they'll release 3 or 4 singles leading into that album. So by the time that album comes out, you're already familiar and you already know these songs. And when they go on tour, and it's such an obvious strategy, but a lot of people are still not doing that. They're putting out records and it's just like, okay, they might release one single. And the idea is on Spotify, in order to really start gaining traction in Spotify, you have to be building one single at a time, another single. Eventually you come out with the release, but you want to release those initial singles, because if you blow your wad and put that whole album out on Spotify, there's no chance of you being able to release those as singles.
That's right.
So you have to be thinking along those lines and that strategy.
And you also have to be thinking as to who your audience is. Who is your audience?
Right.
Are you serving your audience? Or is this all about just serving your own ego or your own needs or your own wants or desires? You got to be thinking about them. It's interesting you bring that up about the release strategy. Peter Gabriel took a lot of heat for the release strategy that he released because he went on tour. Now, Peter Gabriel's a very well-known element. He's a well-known artist. But he released his album a song at a time.
Right.
And started the tour after like the 3rd or 4th song released. And a lot of people, but he played an enormous amount of material on the tour from the new album. And a lot of the audience did not know the material yet.
Okay.
And
yeah,
so
it's a different, like I said, I use the example of Muse only because I'm a huge fan of theirs, and their release strategy has been that they'll release the initial big single,
right?
Then they come out with another one maybe a month or so after, because obviously they'll set the release date 5 or 6 months ahead, but they're enticing people once each month, giving them another piece, giving them another crumb, leading them to the final release. And then of course there's those songs that haven't been released, that singles that after the record comes out they'll release those.
Sure.
Muse is one of these bands, obviously they're so successful that they have the luxury that they're able to cut like a video almost from every song.
Yes.
Which is what they've done in the last 3 or 4 album cycles. I think since the beginning they've released multiple videos, if not from all the tracks, whether they're a lyric video or a combination of an actual conceptual piece, but they have followed that strategy, and I see how well that works for them, because by the time the record is released, already everybody's waiting for whatever songs they haven't released, but at least they've already got 4 or 5 of those tunes that they really know because they've heard it over and over again. So it's interesting that why that didn't work with Peter Gabriel's audience, maybe because they're an older audience. I'm not quite sure, because maybe they consume differently is probably the reason why.
Absolutely, it could be. But again, this is all about the value that you want to give to your audience. You need to know who your audience is.
Absolutely.
And go and give it to them in the way that they want it, and the way that works best for what you're doing. Remember, folks, music today is free. Whether it's you or Beyonce, nobody has to pay for your music.
Right.
So, what are they tuning into? A lot of times it's tuning into the fandom. The audience is tuning into you. Right. As the artist. It's not, the old days of listening to a song on the radio. Oh, I love that. I'm going to go get that song or whatever. It's a different kind of element. And when you're talking about new artists today, I think the most important thing is building that audience and understanding. And in order to build an audience, you have to know who your audience is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely crucial.
And one of the other trends that we're seeing for 2025 is about sonic branding.
Yes.
It will become a central strategy for brands across industries, with companies investing in custom soundscapes, jingles, and audio identities to foster that deeper emotional connection with consumers.
Absolutely. I mean, you think, like, what is sonic branding? Okay, I'll tell you what sonic branding is. When you go to Netflix and you turn it on, what's that thing you hear, dun dun.
Exactly.
NBC, that, dun
Dun,
dun dun.
Exactly.
Yeah, Showtime, HBO, Ba-ba. Yeah, exactly. Everybody has their own sonic branding.
Right.
And that's a very, very important element. Why? I believe it's about attention, it's about identity.
Right.
These are two of the hardest things to get. We're always talking on this show, and it's one of my core beliefs in the business today. We live in an era where the most valuable commodity when you're marketing music is not, the size of your wallet or market share or power or money or anything like that. It's the ability to get someone's attention. And the reason is because we can't buy that anymore. So you have to always keep that in mind when you're going to be, putting things out. What's most valuable? And it's attention. And I think the sonic branding element, you may want to think about that just in terms of, I know you've always talked about that, Eric, with regards to branding on a visual sense.
Right.
Here we talk about a lot of brands that are trying to develop an identity, but from an oral, AURAL point of view.
Yeah,
sonically,
definitely.
Sound-wise, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very important thing.
Here's another element that we want to talk about, which is the whole touring landscape. This is something that the last 2 years has been very kind of up and down. When the pandemic ended, everyone and their mother rushed out into the touring landscape. And it was very, 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 very crowded. Most people couldn't get additional, if they wanted to do another additional night or additional days in a club, couldn't do it because there were too many people
doing it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
And it was a backlash.
Exactly.
Big backlash.
And then what we had is now what we've seen is this economic element where there's not enough money to support all of the artists that are out there.
And we're dealing with inflation and all kinds of other extracurricular things, geopolitical things that are going on that are affecting touring markets and everything. And so you're seeing this whole kind of backlash, and there's only so many dollars that people can spend. So it's like everybody I feel like we've come to this kind of apex where you had the pandemic and everybody was trying to go out the minute this thing was over. And now it's just such a glut, and there's been a backlash. I can't tell you how many bands that have canceled tours in my world that have canceled tours because of low ticket sales or no ticket sales.
Or the costs.
It
costs too much money.
It costs too much money, and these bands are not making money from these tours. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic. It's like, do you go out? And so I think, interestingly enough, I've been hearing this trend a lot that's happening, is that more artists don't need to necessarily be touring early on. You could be doing this all from the comfort of your own home, creating content, creating, live things that you're playing, or there's all kinds of ways. But that's the trend that I see happening now.
Yes.
Before bands or artists really get kicked off the ground, is creating the stuff on your own and building that whole audience and that whole kingdom from your base, and then start building the next steps, which are touring and all of those.
Including major artists.
Right.
I've been following the career of Benson Boone, who was an enormous artist who broke last year.
Right.
And he had huge singles, but the content, the volume of content, little short clips of him performing in Cleveland, him performing at a shopping mall, him performing, you guys can be doing that. It doesn't have to be just one video. You have to constantly be reinventing, maybe just an acoustic version, maybe something else, maybe, but constantly be serving your audience.
Right.
That's another very important element, I think, in the touring thing. Costs have also become a huge factor. And what I mean by costs is the cost of touring, the cost of gasoline, the cost of trucks, the cost of equipment, the cost of labor.
Right.
All of these things, I think, have had, as you mentioned, an enormous impact in reducing the amount of shows. What has happened is that, the top echelon of touring, the top artists
the
are
Taylor
not
Swifts
as affected.
of the world, right, are not affected.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's not even in that league. I mean, she's in the league of, rarefied world
right.
of her
Michael
own.
Jackson, that level.
Yeah, that's not like even where everyone else is at. But obviously, and she just finished, a 2-year
tour.
trek.
Yeah, right.
So it's the idea that it's the people who are beginning and that, just above them, that's the world that's affected the most. And if you read a lot and you look at what's been happening internationally, the amount of club closures
has been staggering. Just here in our market here in Los Angeles, they're just falling like dominoes.
And that affects the whole element of touring. Now, if that's happening here in LA, you can imagine where it's happening in other cities.
And that's
in the
why
country.
I've been telling you what I was just mentioning earlier is that I think that's the trend where it's going now, where artists don't necessarily need to leave even their backyard. They can be just building from their home, which is, in a way, it's exciting. It sucks in the way because everybody likes to perform live and everything. I get that part. I'm in that same boat. But it's exciting because you're not spending or going out there with just blinders on saying, I need to tour. No.
Or losing money touring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And do you have the money to invest in that? Because that does take money. Even if you're doing local clubs on your own, that does take money and time and effort and energy.
Correct.
Why not focus that energy doing this stuff, building your world at home, setting up a nice setup for you at home where the sound sounds great, where you sound great, and you could be creating this content on your own. One thing that you mentioned earlier about creating this constant flow of content.
Yes.
I'm hearing and I'm seeing, and I think it's true, that there's kind of like a backlash starting to be happening with social media content creation and how it's affecting, which we're going to talk about in our next subject with mental health, that some artists it's just a backlash because it's like, it's just too much. There's only so much that I can do. There's only so many hours in the day. How do I focus on writing music when I got to be worried about doing TikTok videos? So I think that there is kind of this backlash happening where less is more. At least I'm seeing that, and I'm starting to apply that even in my world and my strategy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eric. And what's interesting is that as you were speaking about that, one of the things I'm realizing on the very points you're making is how much technology is going to impact that particular world, in that you're going to have programs that will make the short little videos for you.
Yeah,
that
they're already doing it. Yeah, they already have them.
Exactly, where you don't have to be going in and creating that stuff from scratch.
Right.
Where you have, posts and different kinds of things on social media that can be created for you. But I do agree with you. I think that, first of all, I think not only from the mental health standpoint of the artists, from you guys, but also from the capacity of people to actually absorb.
Right.
How many people can they do that for?
And I think there's a backlash of, like, if it's too much, it has a negative effect with the audience. And that's what I feel personally. That's where my gut is telling me. And even with the strategies that I'm trying to apply with my world and my music is to go the opposite way. And if you're going to make a statement, make it count and make it something that's going to be of value. Like I said, less is more.
Yes.
And I think you should be applying that too in social media, which I think is good news for people that are listening that feel like they have to be juggling through hoops and doing dance videos and doing all of this nonsense. I think if you're speaking from your heart, and the things that me and Ritch have been talking about on the show is finding out who your target audience is, what they believe in, what you believe in, what do you stand for. And if you can somehow create a body of content, whether you shoot it in advance or as you go, doing less is more, and you don't have to be doing it every single day at every hour on the hour. I think that that's just too much. And it's affecting our next subject, which is, something that's near and dear to my heart, which is mental health.
Absolutely.
And what we see in 2025 will continue to be more and more at the forefront of artists' careers and be openly spoken about. We have two major guests that are coming up, hopefully by the time that this show airs, that will be coming in the near future, that will be addressing this important issue on upcoming episodes of MUBUTV.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing, Eric. We're starting to see not only mental health being prioritized, but more and more artists openly talking about it and resisting the pressures and the demands that the industry has. One of the things that people don't get about success is that the more successful you become, and I remember Ryan, one of our guests,
from
Maroon 5, Ryan Dusick, talking about this, is that, one of the things that people don't realize is the more and more successful you become, in fulfilling your dreams, the more and more demands that are put on your time.
Right.
And if you have issues and if you have mental health problems, trust me, they're going to be exacerbated by that condition of more and more success. You know, they're not going to get easier and easier and easier.
And you're going to hear about that in some of the stories with some of the guests.
Absolutely. So what we're starting to see is, you know, people like Chapel Roan who were like, no, I can't do 30 interviews a day.
Right.
I simply can't. I can't be creating, you know, content 24 hours a day. I can't be doing whatever it is without sacrificing who I am.
Right.
And I'm not willing to just, you know, throw myself on the business
and
model
that's why,
to allow that to happen.
And that's why, jumping back on the previous subject where we're talking about content creation and social media strategy, it's something like what you and I did when we created all of our promos for the shows for promoting this whole thing when we launched. Yes. We took one day, I think we did it in 12 hours, which was a marathon.
Yes.
And we had everything planned out, and we did literally about 2 to 3 years of content in advance.
In advance.
And so what we're trying to tell you guys is to be a little bit smarter. Maybe what you guys can do out there is plot out your strategy. Think of all the things that you want to talk about. Think about all the videos you want to do. Get all that
messages to your audience.
Messages, get a teleprompter, get everything scripted out so you're not fumbling your words while you're doing this. Invest in a teleprompter. They're very cheap. And then cut all your stuff in one day. Get somebody that's good with cameras, and you set up a real nice setup, and you set up maybe 4 or 5 different looks that you have, and just make it one day where you go and you just bang through all of the stuff that you need to do.
Yes.
And then you've got like a year or 2 of content, and you don't have to feel like that pressure, like you're on that hamster wheel.
Every day creating something more, something more.
Exactly.
And in addition to that, you can also, you know, be planning out not only your content, but also additional elements that you can add, like maybe an acoustic version of the song, you know, doing something that your audience isn't expecting.
Yeah.
And who was it that we had, you know, I wanted to tell you guys, ladies and gentlemen, if you want there's a great episode, and her name is escaping me, that we interviewed all about the content, the woman from Australia. We had her on the show.
Oh.
Remember, she talked all about the content needs. So if you guys want to know, like, what content you need
Amber Horsberg.
Amber Horsberg, thank you. Go back and check out the Amber Horsberg podcast that we did.
Yeah.
She addresses this very, very topic
of
the content that you need, the pieces, what's necessary. And like Eric is saying, you know, take a day, plan it out. Now, I know, like, when we did that, Eric, we took
a lot of planning.
Wrote those for a couple months.
Yeah. So, you know, what I'm saying is script out what you're going to say. You can even throw it through AI and let that come up with something for you, and then you massage it to your own language and your own world, and you come up with all of these pieces of things that you want to do. But it's something that you're going to have to take some time to plot out, just like what we did. This is something that I do with my projects and my musical stuff that I've done, and it's worked wonders, because then you can do everything in one sitting in one day, whether it takes you 6, 8, 10, 12 hours in our case. And once you've done that, you have this body of work. Now, the fun part, or the part that's going to come after that, is either you editing it or getting somebody to come and start editing that content for you. But what happens is that it frees up your time to get back to what you want to do, which is creating more music, you know, thinking about what the next steps you're going to take, because now you have a social content strategy. And another thing too is investing in a social media platform like a Hootsuite or Vista Social, or one of these platforms where you can actually pre-program all of this stuff way in advance. You don't have to be going, oh my God, now I got to stop what I'm doing because I got to do my next post. No, you can do all of this stuff in advance, or get somebody to do it for you in advance. And now you've got all of this strategy already being done while you're sleeping, and there's things that are coming out, and it's just like, it just keeps your mind focused on what you're trying to do, which is creating music.
Yeah, and these are not terribly expensive programs, are they?
They're not. There's monthly fees that are involved, but, you know, they have different tiers like all of these other programs do. But yeah, if it's something that you really are trying to free up your time, I would suggest, you know, any one of those platforms, and we'll put those in the show notes for you guys to check out. But it's something that, if you're not aware of what that is, basically you add your social media platforms to these programs, and then you can create your content and attach your videos, or whether they're photos or whatever it has,
posts.
Exactly. And with your messaging in there, and you can pre-schedule it for a predetermined time. So now once you have all of that done and you have it done in advance, let's say you've gone and you've done your media day is what I call it. And you go and you shoot all of your content in one day. Of course, you got to keep in mind changing clothes so it doesn't look like you did everything in the same day. And then once you get all of that mapped out and done and recorded, then you can go back, start editing all of the stuff, and then you can start pre-planning and start scheduling the stuff in advance. And once you set it, you forget it, and it's a thing of beauty. And then you can just kind of, let that thing do its, magic.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know we're giving you a lot, but these are definitely ways that I think are healthier to do it. You have much more health in the way that you're approaching it, where you're not like on that wheel every single day. Yeah, the hamster wheel. And the other thing that, I want to talk about is, you guys may have heard of this. There's a type of music now called ADHD, which stands for, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it's an actual condition whereby, people are developing this whereby they can't concentrate anymore.
Right. Because there's so much distraction with the social media, with everything that we're being bombarded with. Endless.
Yeah. And we haven't even gotten into like your life.
Right.
Your people, your school, your parents, your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, brother, sister, job, friends. There's all of that as well as social media. And, ADHD music is a type of music now that is becoming very, very popular, that people are saying really helps their mental health. It really helps them to stay focused and relax. And, it's like, this is something that I think it's very interesting. Me being older, I did not grow up in the era where we had cell phones, where everybody was reachable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where everybody got back to you in an instant, where, you didn't get comments like, I texted you 5 minutes ago, where are you?
Right.
You didn't get that, where you didn't have a phone, where you went home and there was actually messages on your machine, So, and it's like, I think, I'm not complaining about it. I said, I feel that 15, 20 years from now, we will learn, as we are learning, what the impact of all of this accessibility and a lot of it is compulsive behavior.
And I've been saying it for a long time, and I'm going to say it again for 2025. I believe, like the stock market crash, we're going to have a social media crash. It's coming, and I'm predicting that right now on this show, that it's going to come because it's just too much. Too often, it never ends, and it's damaging.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. You're absolutely right. And, people need, people often take what's that word? Like
a digital detox.
A digital detox. Yeah. And when did you ever think that you'd need a digital detox?
Or a digital cleanse,
Yeah, exactly. Where I'm not on my phone. I'm not, on social media. I'm not being otherwise distracted. It is something that I face every day with my students in the classroom. And it's so annoying. It's like I am challenged for their attention.
Right.
And these are people who are paying big bucks to go to a school for a program that they're supposedly interested in. And, I don't take it personally, but I think like, if this is what you're doing in every class,
right.
Where else in your life are you doing this?
Right.
So, it really is a problem.
Yeah.
And it's a problem with a very specific element of the last generation where this becomes an issue.
Yeah, and the final area that we want to discuss on today's show for 2025 is the big unknown, which is AI. So much to discuss. Yeah. AI and songwriting, lyric writing, and creating precise mixes. We can go on and on. We've had a couple of people on the show this year about that very topic. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts, Rich, on...
Well, I think, the fascinating aspect about AI is that I never think of AI just in terms of music or just in terms of the music business. AI is something that is going to, permeate every aspect of our lives.
It already is.
Socially, politically, technologically, medically.
Yep.
What other ways?
In every way.
In every way, it's going to impact our lives.
It already is. It's happening as we speak.
And what is frightening about it, I think, for a lot of people, is not so much the AI, but it's the speed at which it's developing.
Changing, yeah.
And that it's coming about. I mean, every day you're seeing some new presentation of someone developing now there's an AI app that I was reading about yesterday that allows you to sing in the voice of your favorite artist. Can you imagine? Like, you get up there and you're singing like Steve Perry, and it's his voice coming out. And what's weird about this is that, there are not specific copyright laws, trust me, there will be, around just the voice.
And that's the interesting to see that trend just on that level, if what's going to happen when they start legislating this and putting some guardrails into effect. I mean, there's been a couple of laws that passed earlier this year, the Elvis Act and a couple of other ones. And so it'll be interesting to see. But even now, there's a program that I saw, speaking of you talking about programs that record in any voice of any singer, that I saw that you can just record 30 seconds of your voice, just read a little piece of a script of something, and it will take your voice, and now it has completely captured it, and you can literally create the podcast. Who knows, maybe this podcast that we're doing right now is with AI. We're joking, but it's literally gotten that scary that you can record 30 seconds of your voice and put it into something and just create a piece of content from it. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it'll just be very interesting to see how this trend continues and how it's affecting the music business.
Yeah, I mean, when you were speaking about that, I know that there is a program that you don't even need the voice.
Yeah, I sent you a thing where they created
you just put the information about whoever, their history or interviews or their background or what they've done.
And it'll have guests that'll come out that are AI. And I think I surprised you with that.
And I was like, where did this interview come from?
Yeah,
it knew all about my career. It knew about what I had done. It knew about philosophies that I had espoused. I mean, it was scary. Right. It was scary. I mean, these people were talking about me as if and I was like...
And you called me on the phone, like freaking out. Where did you get this? And I go, I played a joke on you. I said, I don't know, Ritch.
I don't know. It was just
something I heard. I go, did you hear this? And then all of a sudden I told you, well, it's my father and me, because my dad and me are just real into the whole thing with AI.
But I never knew that could exist.
I didn't know either. And we both didn't know either. And we did it. And we just wanted to blow your mind with that and just go how scary. And we're still... Guys that are listening right now, we're still you think we would be in AI version 9.0, but we're just still in 1.0. So imagine how this is going to get as this continues. So again, what are the ramifications and how that's going to, affect what's happening in the music industry, just with copyright law, just with all these songs that have come out now in the vein of this artist or that artist. I can't tell you how many videos, I'm sure you guys have seen them too on YouTube, where they take a Depeche Mode song and they've gone and they've redone a new one, another version, and you're hearing the voice and it sounds just like Dave Gahan, and it's just like, holy crap, I cannot believe it sounds like it would be a new Depeche Mode single.
Yes, exactly. And you were speaking before about the ability of just a sample of your voice. They can actually take real singers. Brenda Lee, the little teenage girl, Brenda Lee, back in the 50s, who recorded that Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree.
Right.
It's an old 50s hit. Universal officially got the record, that they got just the vocal of that, put it into an AI program. Now, Brenda Lee is,
been long gone. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was frightening. They literally were able to make a Spanish version. Now, Brenda Lee doesn't speak Spanish. She's never recorded in Spanish.
But in her voice and everything.
And it was her voice.
Unbelievable.
In perfect Spanish. I've seen the same thing in Hungarian, in Chinese, in a multitude of languages, just on the basis of what you were saying, just on a sample.
And we've talked to the lady, I forget her, it was either this year or last year. I can't remember the name of the company right now, but they were able to take out the voices and and create stems from that, and
separate the music.
And that's the trend, obviously, that we're going to see now. How these old copyrights are going to take or breathe new life.
Oh, absolutely. For sync, for advertisement, for remixes,
for different languages, like you said, with Brenda Lee, and now introducing those songs in those markets, which is going to create more revenue for music publishing purposes.
Absolutely. And I think the converse, where you could take a song from India or a hit song from Europe and have it in English.
Yeah.
For different markets. Or I remember, it used to be such a big thing when, I was a huge Peter Gabriel fan, and his first 3 albums he did in English and in German. And I used to have them on vinyl. And it was just so interesting to hear him speak excuse me, not speak, but sing in German. But he actually went in and did the whole record in German. David Lee Roth did his solo album, and he recorded the entire album in Spanish.
I remember that. Remember that? Smile, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just hysterical to hear, with his style.
Singing in that. But now it's going to be effortless if
exactly.
People, and then
you don't even have to sing in Spanish.
And then it goes to the bigger question that we've talked about, I think, in last year's episode when we were talking about 2024, which is the whole idea of how that's going to work with people once they've passed. I think that's going to become more commonplace. Yes. We talked about it last year a little bit, but the whole idea, and I think that's going to be something that's probably going to start being built or structured into contracts or maybe wills for their last wills and testament of what they want to do beyond when they're gone.
Yes.
Because a lot of these people, obviously, I mean, we all want to be immortalized. And if it's something that it can go beyond the life of us, and I'm not privy to anything that the Beatles are doing currently, but I can guarantee you that there's something probably in the works with some kind of AI show. They've seen the success of what's happened with ABBA, and I can imagine that the Beatles will have something. Another prediction that I'm making, that will have some kind of AI element to where you can go and see the Beatles, just like the success of ABBA. I see that's a band that's primed for that.
Yes, and what's interesting about the ABBA thing as opposed to the Beatles is the fact that the ABBA, all four of those members are alive,
right?
And they all had.
But they don't want to perform anymore.
They don't want to perform anymore, but they have very specific input into the creation. You're talking about the Voyage show.
Correct.
If you guys haven't seen that, go type into Google, put ABBA and then space Voyage, Voyage, and it will take you to the website where you can actually, it's like a 2-minute clip.
Right.
Of, it's an actual theater in London where people pay, good money, $150, $175 to see 4 avatars on stage dancing and performing an entire hour-and-a-half show doing all the hits.
Right.
Now, also in 2025, you're going to get Whitney Houston. It's going to go out. Now, the Whitney Houston is a AI hologram.
Correct. But there's going to be a live band.
It's going to be a live band,
right.
A real live band. So real musicians are going to be playing, but you will have a singer who will never hit a bad note,
right?
Never be in a bad mood,
never get hoarse,
never be tired. I mean, think about that. And then also the other one that's going to come this year, Eric, is Amy Winehouse.
Right.
So this is going to be very interesting. I'm fascinated to look at it from a cultural point of view of who's willing to pay money to see an artist that they know is, not the real thing. Now, some of these shows have already occurred, not with these people, but, animated characters and so forth have appeared in Japan, where people will really go to a theater to see this.
Right.
It's a fascinating kind of element. But like what you were talking about, there are a lot of people who are getting to make the decision rather than letting their family make the decision.
Correct.
Do I want my career to continue after I die?
There's a positive and a negative to it. I see the positive is, like, for me, you and I have talked obviously in private of the show, some of the bands that you got to see that I wish I could have seen, like Zeppelin, Floyd,
Queen,
Queen, which I never got to see. And I think you're going to be seeing, I guarantee you, Queen, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, maybe, I don't know about Pink Floyd, but maybe something like Zeppelin. You're going to see that once that trend, ABBA's setting the trend, and it's only going to be with specific projects. I don't think that that's going to be something that's just going to be for everybody. It's just for certain projects. Iconic that you're going to start seeing that. And I'm telling you, the Beatles, I guarantee you, I don't know, I'm not privy to it, but I guarantee you they've got to be working on something, because I think, you've got Paul McCartney that's at a certain age and Ringo Starr.
81.
And they're not going to be around forever. And so I think that's going to be the next phase to live beyond their years. Kiss, we talked about how they're going to be doing that in 2027. And they're going to be, they've decided to obviously stop touring, as everybody knows. And so I think you're going to start seeing this, but again, with bands that they know that are going to probably do good business. And I think ABBA, everybody's using that as the template.
Yes, they are, because ABBA put the time, money, and energy into successfully doing it, and has proven what's the word? They've proven that there's a market where people will actually show up and pay money in a live setting, like real dollars, and really be there to watch these avatars on stage.
The other thing is that ABBA is in such a unique position because they had so many great songs. I mean, it's just like a who's who of the great songs, and they've gone through generations. That's why I'm saying bands like the Beatles are primed for something like this to really make a really great show where you can kind of just see them at their prime. And there's a lot of video now with all the AI. It can develop a whole new show. And so that's why I think you're going to see that. But ABBA was in a very unique position. That's why I think the Beatles, because they had so many hit songs.
Yes.
And they've crossed so many regions of the world. ABBA is like one of those global bands, you know?
Cultural institutions, as I like to call them. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, which the Beatles certainly apply
into that category.
ABBA applies that. What's interesting about ABBA is, if you're old enough to remember, ABBA had 6 years of hits. And then they stopped being a band in 1981, okay, from 74 to 7 years. But here's the reality. Those songs were hit records that sort of came and went, but they have become institutionalized over the last 44 years, where now they're like...
They had a resurgence in the 90s. It's almost... They have a very similar story to Queen's catalog. Queen had their hits, they had their time, and then it kind of went away for a long time. Then Hollywood picked up that catalog here in the U.S.
And movies.
And they started to place it into movies and films, and it started to become ingrained into the culture. I mean, now you hear Queen songs, and it's just like, wow.
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, like Wayne's World really revived the
then Bohemian Rhapsody later, the movie. I mean, so they've had all these. That's why I'm thinking the Beatles, you know, they just had this thing with, what was the documentary? Was it Get Up?
Get Back.
Get Back. Sorry, Get Back.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, that's probably very secretive. Again, I'm not privy to information, but I guarantee you, if there's any band that's going to do something like that next, it will be the Beatles.
Yes. It brings up an interesting point, which, you know, I want to sort of bring up and get your take on it. You know, when I was growing up, and I'm older than you, I grew up in the 70s. And one of the things that we had that I was very aware of is that we were into music of the here and now. You know, the new Joni Mitchell, the new Jethro Tull, the new Zeppelin. I mean, that's just what we knew. We were in the Renaissance, and we didn't know it. Never was there ever a time in growing up when I was aware that my generation, and I think the generation even before, was into music from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You know, they weren't into music from like the 30s and 40s. You know, maybe if they were older, you know, you'd get some people who were into the 50s, but not many. It wasn't a generational thing. Today, you have multi-generations that are into the Beatles. When you go to these shows of like Billy Joel or Stevie Nicks, you have multi-generations of people. When you speak about like the ABBA, it's multi-generations.
Correct.
Kids know this. I have students who are 18, 19, 20 who know Led Zeppelin, who know Pink Floyd, who know AC/DC. Led Zeppelin hasn't made records since, you know, 1979, 80. Yeah.
80.
I mean, and yet these things are very, very real and relevant for them. So what the point that I'm bringing up is that when you talk about these things, it makes me wonder.
Everything old is new.
Yes, and how challenging when that's the consciousness to go to a Led Zeppelin thing when you're 15, or for the 15-year-old that's not even born yet, 10, 20 years from now, when he'll see that, or the Beatles. How difficult is it to get new things in terms of your consciousness?
Right.
We have so much music. You know, the majority of music on Spotify is from the past that's played. The majority of it.
Right.
I mean, you look at like that thing that went viral a year and a half ago, the guy on the skateboard to Fleetwood Mac's Dreams.
Correct.
You know, and now that's like one of those songs. It's like a cultural institution.
Right.
Old or young, everybody knows that.
Right.
But the point I'm making is the one that you're bringing up about, you know, when these things become inculcated into the culture long after the acts are still around, what does that do for new artists, and how challenging does it make it for a new band to come along, a new Queen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that is the challenge. I mean, it's you know, I think it's the way people are consuming and discovery, and that's why you're seeing, you know, the trend was before, back years and years ago, that we've talked about a million times on the show, is that bands did not want to have their music into any kind of commercial because it would felt like selling out, and we talked about that recently.
Different consciousness, yes.
Right, and now it's like people are clamoring and trying to get their stuff into anything that they can that makes sense, because then you just never know how that music is going to be rediscovered. And we've seen example after that. We talk about the music supervisor from Stranger Things. Her name escapes me now, but when she did the track, not only for the Metallica, Running Up That Hill,
Nora Feldner,
and what an impact that made, and how that brought it into a new audience, into a whole new world. And it just, I think that song shot up to #1 again.
Around the world. It did 40 years later.
40 years later. So you're going to start seeing more and more of those kind of stories happening. In terms of what your question was, is how do bands, break through that noise? That's the challenge. That's the challenge that we're facing now. That's the challenge that you guys are facing now as artists.
Yeah.
That now it's easier than ever to get your songs out and get out there, but it's harder than ever. So it's this paradox that you're in, that you're constantly facing. So that's where you have, and I hate to use the expression because it's so cliche, thinking outside of the box and trying to think of new ways of how you can get your music out there. So, it's such an exciting time for me personally as an artist. I'm so excited about the possibilities because anything is possible right now. But at the same time, it's very challenging because, again, like what you've always said, and it's been a mantra here of the show, is trying to get people's attention. So that's the challenge now for you guys out there, is how do you get people's attention in 2025? Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.